Mark, Barbir, one of my favorite problems is one that you guys are solving, which is this idea of a digital chief of staff. Like it's one thing to say, hey, we can create as many agents as possible. And, a couple months back, you got people stacking their Mac minis, and you got OpenClaw agents running around and people bragging on how many agents they're running at all times. It's one thing to have tons of agents running around. It's another to have them aligned and actually doing meaningful work, right? And not having it get away from you.
Absolutely.
So a chief of staff to me seems so integral. And it's interesting to me because the problem that I understand that earmark solves, and by all means, I want to hear the story of how this has come together, but it's unique to me in the sense that you do not have these agents sort of passively, or you don't have this system, this chief of staff passively sitting, waiting for instruction. It is actively participating. Specifically, it's right at the pulse point of meetings and actually doing work in parallel with meetings, so that at the close of a meeting, everything isn't now trying to get back up to speed. It is actually the technology, the intelligence has actually been tracking with what's been going on. So tell us a bit about the company, how you got to where you are, and what you guys are doing right now.
Yeah, so Caleb, you nailed it. Thanks for having me first off. So I'm building a company called Earmark. We're basically trying to make meetings actually do the work for you instead of creating more work afterwards. And the way we do that is by turning conversations that happen across the company into usable work and shared context. So instead of a meeting ending with notes and a bunch of follow-up work, Earmark turns what's said into decisions, prototypes, requirements, updates, and then context that people and AI agents can use later. And the reason why this matters is a huge amount of the company's most valuable knowledge is in conversation. But today it gets buried in meetings, or depending on who, or depends on someone to mainly pick it up and then put it into the next tool or the next step of the workflow. We want to close that gap. So talking about the work and then doing the work becomes much closer to becoming the exact same operation, the same thing. In a lot of ways, we believe that in 5 years, the expectation that you will finish a meeting and most of your work will already be finished. It's just going to be how it is, right? That is the future of work, and that's basically the future we're preparing for. To your point around AI chief of staff, like what we really want from a product experience is, since you have all conversational context, like can you be informed, right, of maybe a dependency or work stream that's like 2 or 3 projects away, maybe an executive change in terms of strategic direction or OKRs. Can I be informed just in time, just in need when I first wake up that day? Like, what are the things I should worry about, right? Like maybe there's a blocker on this other team. How do I facilitate unblocking them, right? But this idea of once all conversational context is there, it enables the chief of staff sort of operations you're talking about, right? Where, I enter every conversation, I'm fully prepared. I know exactly what to index on, right? I'm proactively notified of these things. And then I can actually go forth and just facilitate and execute work the way I need to, and that's true for basically any contributor or any leadership in an R&D organization.
So can we take maybe one use case, maybe a simple one, and really bit by bit kind of take
Mm-hmm.
us through what that would potentially look like?
Yeah, so one key use case would be probably the simplest would be something like for product managers, they typically go through a lot of discovery calls, right, with customers. They're usually showing prototypes or prototypical work of some sort. They're trying to validate language. They're trying to validate the concept in general. So one way to think about it is like maybe you have a lovable prototype, and you shop it to 5 different customers or prospects. You get insights or their feedback from that, right? You try to harden the solution a little bit more. You iterate on it in sort of a very lean way, using a vibe coded product. And then at that point, you have to turn it into real work, right? Meaning a deliverable that's like on production, that has 4.9, 5.9 availability, right? That passes compliance, IT specs, right? Has security rigor built into it. So you have to go to a delivery team, an engineering team to consume it, to break it up. And so for the way I think about earmark is it's along the ride, through all of those discovery calls, and then it's along for the ride with all the engineering calls you're having. And let's say if you have all the context around that initiative, you're able to do things like a very specific workflow might be like authoring user stories. Okay, so a really heavyweight thing that product teams and R&D teams had to deal with, back maybe a couple years ago was, okay, we're going to do a feature breakdown. We're going to look at this mock together. We're going to go through and synthesize all this customer feedback together, and now we're going to generate user stories in a live session that might take several hours, right? And everybody's like watching a scribe, in the form of a product manager filling out a Jira board, as an example. For a tool like Earmark, we would basically like take all of those steps and just consolidate it into like an immediate activity, because all that context is already there for the delivery team, right? Oftentimes, the way that our customers will use Earmark is, say they're in feature planning and they're showing like all the Jira tickets that are there. It'll have all the compounded context for the full project, but then it actually enables you to live scribe, right? So the solution is real time. It generates, and updates documents in real time. So if you're looking at all your Jira tickets, with the team, and let's say the acceptance criteria isn't quite fleshed out, people can just like steer the conversation to, that acceptance criteria and basically fill out the details that might have been missed or would require multiple turns, in terms of maybe your individual contributors reviewing those tickets, giving you feedback, right, and having this multi-turn workflow versus just having it all solved at the same time, right, because we're all talking through that artifact of those deliverables together.
So how did you arrive at this? Was it a logical, like, foregone conclusion that you looked? And I noticed some of the language on the website says the meeting is the work. And this kind of comes back to this idea, I think, that you've painted this picture of the future where, human beings were on these calls, but we're actually here and the work is happening in real time. How did you arrive at this?
Yeah, so for my co-founder and I, our backgrounds are, and we've been in R&D orgs for a very long time, 0 to 1, scaled enterprise SaaS, really high complexity environments. One example is we both ran software engineering at a company called Mindbody, which is like a large public SaaS wellness platform for small, like, wellness businesses, small businesses. We had a delivery team of like over 250 people that was both distributed through acquisition, right? High complexity, 18 delivery teams, spun up at any given time. And what we found is that the coordination overhead for both, the research I was talking about, right? So discovery to application or building was extraordinarily heavyweight, but also the amount of internal meetings, right? Like you're close to your colleagues, let's say you're part of a pizza team, you're like, your best friends with your designer, you're having lunch with them every day, your engineers are great. And what ends up happening is folks just gravitate to each other in servicing internal needs, and then that means more meetings, right, in order to get the clarification or whatever deliverables are. And that coordination lift and overhead, and then cross-team coordination just means that people are in meetings all the time, like in these environments. And what happens is that, and what we experience firsthand is real work is just really elusive in that environment, right? The only time you can really get work done is early in the morning before people get on Slack, late at night when people go home, and often on weekends, right? The deep work just doesn't happen, and that we've resigned ourselves, to this condition, that like we're just in meetings all the time, not much I can do, I got to crank that PowerPoint out, at 11 p.m. when the kids go to sleep. That's kind of where we lived, or where we came from. So the concept behind the service has always been, well, today, like what value do we get out of voice AI or meeting tools, really, right? It's like, well, you get a generic summary that nobody really reads because they're sort of in the ether. People feel good that something played scribe, but they're really not applicable, right? I mean, you might use them for a core insight or throw them into an LLM at some point, but they're kind of limited in value. The same thing's true for AI notes, right? Which is a category that's really taken off, where it's only valuable to you and your own tracking, right? And yes, you could take it and distill it and synthesize it with a local agent and kind of kick things downstream. But for us, we just think that's a lack of creativity, right? Or like, where it's like that context is worth so much more, right? Like, could we just take all of that and just leverage it and take that next step, which is I'm going to generate real deliverables from this now, not just AI notes or summaries, which have limited utility.
As you were explaining some of that, it made me picture what it would be like to have a voice agent enter the chat in these discussions. And I don't know if that's currently in a model or in the roadmap of things. But for us, I noticed at the end of last year, we built 2 agents that are our primary agents. Our company is called 79 Development, like 79 gold in the periodic table is 79.
Mhm.
So
Awesome.
we made one agent 7 and one 9, and 7 is strictly observes and reflects back. So it does research analysis, etc. And then the other 9, it will hand over observations to 9, which will synthesize strategically based on certain criteria.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to me because we would pair them with a voice agent, and then we used our onboarding process, just simple aspects of regular onboarding for clients, where they would just phone a number and have a very natural conversation. In fact, I had one client after the discovery call go, was that a real person after? Which I'm sure, a lot of the voice models are very accurate.
Sure.
This is no surprise.
Sure.
But I'm curious to know if there's been an instance where you would see that integration, where perhaps that intelligence might need some guidance to say, look, guys, you've been talking about these 3 things before. We're at a standstill. So if it could sort of almost raise a hand in a meeting and be saying, at one point to say, look, you guys have mentioned these. Can we get a decision on these? Here's some points that
Yeah.
are considered based on our analysis while you've been talking.
Yeah, so we have a really similar equivalent to that, Caleb, but it's not like sort of a voice modality. Since it works in real time, one of the things that your mark is able to do is have agents that are assistive in real time, but in ways that like one example that we have is we have an engineering translator as an example. So maybe your team's having this like esoteric debate and it's a circular debate, but you don't want to be like, hey guys, hold up, like please explain what we're talking about. Like, what is the problem really? It'll translate engineering terms in real time, right? Or
Nice.
translate acronyms, in real time in terms of organizational speak that's kind of thrown around. Maybe I'm a little newer to the team. I'm not familiar with the acronyms that are being used, right? So that's like one part. The other part that the platform supports is this idea of personas, which are essentially subject matter expert agents that you can introduce to a call where, let's say if I wanted more security rigor, around future planning, it'll play what a security architect would ask in terms of questions, or maybe non-functional requirements like accessibility that usually come in really late. What would an accessibility champion ask, right? Or a compliance expert ask of a certain topic? And it's all generated in sort of a textual agent and artifact. The idea of voice would be sort of the next step of that. But what we're trying to figure out is real-time modalities, right? That like really serve. I think more the single player. Like if I'm the facilitator of a meeting and I'm a product manager as an example, I kind of want that rigor, right, or the ability to ask those questions. But I almost need it as a passive assist, right? Because I don't want that's not so much like show my cards, but like it's really for me, right, as an assistive agent. We are working on a multiplayer concept though. We actually just released it this past week, where you can have multiple contributors to single projects and then have agentic search across all contexts for both projects and all discussions all time. And maybe that's so maybe there's other opportunities for us to like have maybe the next iteration of this is more voice assistive, like in the moment while you're in a meeting. But I do like that concept.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I can see the advantage in how you've currently built it, in the sense that it's almost running in parallel, like an assistant sitting here quietly listening, handing notes, pointing something out,
Right.
almost in a,
Back to the chief of staff, right? Like if you had a chief of staff that was super capable, like what would that chief of staff do? They would be like in the background, like providing you insights, notes, proactively getting you ready for it, making you look amazing, which is, I mean, a little different modality, yeah.
yeah, maybe you could just have that additional voice modality take the parts of the conversation to close it that they don't want to say, the tough part. So it's interesting. You have the engineer translator. Maybe there'll be a Gen Z translator that you have that functionality, so you can.
It's on the roadmap. On the roadmap.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, that's funny. And then back to understanding millennial management to also understand it. Well, it sounds really fascinating, to me. How do you find it? You both co-founders come from a technical background. Is that right?
Yep.
So Sanden, is that right? That the other.
Yeah, Sanden Gocka. Uh-huh.
Okay. So what is that like to do you find that you guys are just, it gives you an added momentum? I think of, a lot of, Elon Musk's writing and the Book of Elon. If you haven't checked it out, very interesting, audiobook to put on while you're doing something. But, seeing the first principles and how he had to go learn business as a secondary thing because he would be frustrated with the point that it is a very concrete, decision that needs to be made, and yet it would sometimes be put off, and then he didn't know if the financial decision was being made for other reasons, and it
Yeah.
was almost out of necessity that finance and sales and investor relations were all learned as a secondary. But how is it with a technical co-founder?
Yeah, so I think for both of us, the ramp's steep, right? And I think we're both like open-eyed in terms of this is the cost of admission, in terms of doing 0 to 1, becoming a founder, being comfortable with uncomfortability, and learning a whole set of skill sets that we probably would never have imagined, right? Both go-to-market, founder-led selling, social content. A great example is, we're both, I think, naturally, I wouldn't say antisocial, but we are. And to the point where like we really didn't have a social presence before, as an example, and then now when you have a business, like who's going to advocate for you if it's not you, right? And then also folks discover products and services like through channels like that today, right? And just embracing whatever that is. Financial acumen, signing up Benny's, setting up a Delaware LLC, like, fundraising potentially, like whatever the paths are. And to your point, like it's all a means to an end, like for us, like we're just passionate about making amazing products that people want. Even better yet, a product that we ourselves would use every day, and something that provides daily and essential value and critical value to the customers we serve, right? And like, and we want to do it in a delightful way, a thoughtful way. We kind of consider ourselves like product is craft snobs, and practitioners. We want to build the best experience ever. And the only way to manifest that, to your point, is to learn all the other disciplines that enable us to get there.
I just want to read a couple testimonials. I've never done this before, but I
Sure.
was impressed with them. So we got, senior product manager, I don't know if I'll name the companies, but the company names are listed here. If Notion and Gemini are my daily drivers, Earmark is the true undisputed MVP of my stack. Strong words. Another, working with
Wow.
multiple agents at once is my new normal. It's hard to imagine going back to the old way of working. This another one. The suggested questions are always spot on. Things I was about to ask but hadn't formulated yet. It's like Earmark reads my mind. Another one, absolute game changer for productivity and product management. So anytime, I've done product development, work closely with clients in the space that were,
Yeah.
right, trying to pioneer AI tools back in 2016.
Mhm.
Anytime you're finding a language like this, it is such a beautiful indication of, strong product market fit. Ideally to the point, like you said, where you try to take something away from them and they're like, whoa, 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 hold on. That's the goal. So I'm curious to know, with adoption, where do you feel you're bottlenecked right now? Do you find that it's word of mouth that's moving? Are you finding, conferences? Is it through outreach you guys are doing that you're actually finding the needle move?
Yeah. For us, it's almost entirely founder-led outbound, in the form of LinkedIn. That's kind of like our primary channel, and everything else sort of stems from that. And I think from a bottleneck perspective, the biggest thing for us is what we're doing is we're basically creating a solution that changes how people do work, and in a way that people haven't really had a mental model or an analog for before. So I think our first challenge, our first bottleneck is this idea of being typecast as a note taker, right? Like so a commoditized space, again, a very low creativity space. They're kind of ubiquitous and they're everywhere now. And so the first challenge for us is like, well, like not notes but real work, right? Well, what does that mean? And even in that, until they actually like try the product, it still seems a little abstract, So for them to get to that value moment, that wow moment, is one blocker for us. So Stuart Butterfield has this great essay when he spun up Slack called "We Don't Sell Saddles Here," and this idea of Slack not being yet another chat utility, like HipChat or AOL Instant Messenger back in the day, that like it was truly collaborative work and work redesigned, right? You're literally changing the way you do work through this multi participant collaborative workflow with the ability to share files and all these things. And so the pitch was really hard, right? They're like we can't be, HipChat version 2, like we're literally changing the way you work. And I think that we have very much that same sort of challenge where it's we're going to change the way you work, but it's like, what does that actually mean? And how do I internalize that in short order? And how does that cascade into like a funnel, right? And go to market material and demo pitches and all the things, and we're getting better. It's like a school of hard knocks, right? Oftentimes, customers will reflect language back to us that's much better than our own language, and we're always like kind of resynthesizing and kind of picking things up. But that's like one piece. And then in terms of like go to market, like we would love to get really good at every channel, right? Like once we, assuming we need to take capital at some point, right, or sort of augment or get much more aggressive in terms of go to market, like what does a multi-channel strategy look like with like cold email, paid ad spend, social, AEO, GEO, which you all specialize in, our own SEO efforts, right? Like we feel like we're good at some of these things, but it's actually really hard to get really good and really deep with all of them simultaneously. So that's the reason why we've really picked founder-led selling as our initial go-to-market.
I think the analogy, if you picture an engine and or like gears within an engine, really bolting on pieces of that to be able to come in around at certain points. And the benefit of that, I think, is instead of immediately acquiring that talent, training it, directing it, overseeing it, and then having them hire within, so you get these specialized roles within, you have a little department. If you're able to find some of that or get the majority of that value by just coming alongside a team that does a lot of that specific thing, that can be really helpful, especially if that team will help build out that capability with you over time. So you just hand over that aspect of it.
Yeah, that would be probably the model we go with, because I think with a lot of AI native shops, we're just at this inflection point where we can do so much with so little. And the idea of augmentation, in terms of agencies, seems appealing, right? Or folks that are just subject matter experts that can do an initial lift, and then maybe they sort of hand off, like once the machine and the gearing is built, or maybe we learn, from those engagements and sort of absorb just through osmosis and having those engagements of how to do that work ourselves. But I think our bias is almost like augment in that way first before hiring, right? And then if for whatever reason it just becomes like a gold vein of a channel, right, and just requires real nurturing and love, then the economics will work out. Maybe we do staff up for those things, but we're still still finding our way.
Heard the only real ratio you need to pay attention to is LTV to CAC. How much is it costing us right now to acquire a customer, and what is the potential lifetime value? There's some numbers in here that I think are worth kind of chewing on, like really considering what a lifetime value would be, especially considering what the valuation of your company might be like in a couple of years, or if whether or not you would choose to take an exit, what that exit might be like within a certain horizon, like over the next few years, if there's this gold rush, if there's this vein where companies are looking and acquisition becomes more of a growth strategy for some entities, what that value is. So if you look 24 months out, what would this value be? If you can get some sense of what that number would be to come back to see what the value of any one customer is, then to me it feels a little bit like the game right now is acquisition to some degree. Okay. Acquisition if you have enough of a market fit to keep them, because I wonder if the biographies, the stories being told, a few years from now, and you look back at the current, Jeff Bezos and others that are looking and hedging their bets, going into it knowing the probability is that we won't land exactly where we are. But if you've been able to acquire customers that would trust you with your product as a chief of staff to get the work done, buying into your thesis of that you painted here, which is like, hey, we see a world where you log on to calls like this and the work is being done, by the time you log off, this is happening or it has happened, then it might be that acquisition of those customers becomes that calculation that you want while you just continue to iterate. I mean, if you can keep the testimonials coming that you're seeing right now, then it might be part of the game right now is to grab as much of that, real estate, in terms of economically speaking, businesses that are doing stuff, because if user behavior solidifies and people, kind of choose if they're with Yahoo, Hotmail, Gmail, if they sort of settle and they're like, I'm done entertaining which email is the best, I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm already paired with this. There might be some aspect of that when it comes specifically to trusting a chief of staff. Like I like, you know,
Yeah, yeah, Caleb, I don't disagree with you. I think it's definitely a land grab right now, and that people are making up their minds in terms of maybe what the next wave of incumbents are. But what I do like about where we are right now with how disruptive AI has been, you think about OpenAI's position a year and a half ago, right, relative to Anthropic's position today, and sort of the inversion that's taken place in terms of enterprise and doing something really well and serving enterprise really well. I feel like the script hasn't been written for any incumbent right now, nor any startup, which makes it really really fascinating, right? So like for us, like we know that we'll get to that land, that land grab mode, but there's also a lot of value in almost incubating a concept where like we have enterprise customers, right, that are like large scale SaaS organizations, and there's like hundreds of users that are using the platform today. For those ones, if we make the product just absolutely amazing for those audiences, which we feel like we're really close to, we're basically calibrating the machine, right, around delight and stickiness, and like we mentioned, daily and essential use as being one of our goals. We can validate all that with those audiences as we kind of get more uh, as we get better at our go-to-market motion in diversify our channels. But we're learning it all at the same time. To your point, right? Like the Elon example. If he has to learn rocket engineering, the analog is distribution is our rocket engineering right now. So, yeah. So and we have no choice but to get good at it, right? And that's fine. That's just the way it is. Yeah. So I feel like we're both, like me and my co-founder, like sponges, around like distribution concepts right now. And to your point, I think a lot of the inherent value in early stage shops like ours will be, like how did you figure out distribution at the right time in order for that flywheel to get spun up to be relevant, right? And that the distribution piece is as important as the core product piece. Completely agree.
very cool. Well, if there was one thing that you felt like was if you could push one lever for growth, like the most important thing, if you had to put your finger on one thing, what would it be right now? You mentioned possibly funding, is an investment round. Is that something you feel like would have the biggest needle move for you guys?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is it if we're able to cultivate relationships with people who just have large followings in general, like social, maybe they're subject matter experts that write a lot, they're domain experts that are recognized through Substack and YouTube or whatever else. And what's really interesting is whenever we have like a mention of our service, just, and not even in a promotional way, just in a, hey, I use earmark for this, it's my AI chief of staff, I use it with Obsidian and my local agents or whatever. What we see is just tremendous inbound and organic interest from like those events. So one thing I'm really keen on, and I know some folks have figured this out and done a really good job, is like how do you programmatically approach relationship building with those key individuals that have these large audiences, because in some ways they already come so qualified, right? They've heard about it. This is how we consume and purchase services today, right? Like it's not me even doing an AEO search. That might be like the second or third step. It might be that I heard that the solution is pretty amazing from somebody I really trust. I've been following this person for years, right? I heard it on Lenny's podcast last Tuesday. Whatever the mention is, whatever the inception is, and then at that point, they're going to go through like their own discovery around the service, right? They're going to go through the trial. They're going to be bought into whatever it is, and it's really interesting because like it basically accelerates like the first 10 steps of like
100%.
getting a person primed. So that's the big thing for us is like can we solve for that? That's like that's, I would love if I had a magic wand, I would solve for that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the inverted version of that also works, where
Mm-hmm.
you talk top of funnel can quickly move you from step one to like, someone from being not even knowing who you are, let alone cold, to being, warm with strong intent to purchase. But the opposite, I think, is interesting, especially in high ticket, big contracts, procurement, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, where already your business development team has made contact, there's sales connection there, but someone is going to now look and say, okay, of these, who are the real contenders? Even to a point, so you're already mid funnel and now you're wanting to move closer. When you come up, because the team, whether it's a board or other decision makers, they're going to use whatever model, if it's Claude, if it's chat, if it's, whatever, they're going to use the model that they already trust. So the more they use it, it reinforces their trust in it, like a trusted advisor that they may trust more than their friends, because when it comes to the level of precision or expertise, they wouldn't necessarily trust their friend to make a call like that. So when they ask and then you surface already answering all the questions in the tendering process, when you've, that's an aspect of it that I think is like really special that I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I've read a fair bit about conversion rates, right, from just having that type of presence, and how hard it is to sort of cultivate. I just read today that like basically the Reddit signal, right, in terms of I think OpenAI's crawling of Reddit like just totally dropped yesterday. But if I was gonna approach Reddit, and if I had a really intentional sort of AEO strategy around making sure that I was mentioned in all these posts and having community contributions around my product in order to like help out that AEO flywheel, those are all strategies that like I'd love to figure out. Yeah.
Well, you're speaking my language. One aspect of that is even where the sort of black hat or gray hat models for hacking the system have worked in the past and certainly accelerated or aggravated with AI, exploitation, where you'll figure it out and then they hack it. The models will adjust. And that's why the organic, even this, having conversations like this feels so organic in the sense that it's building the soil of our ecosystem personally, because our names are connected, our companies are connected. When there's all this language discussion that is connected to real world people, products, real problems to be solved, use cases discussed, it creates a richness in the soil that it's absent when the synthetic version tries to just go replicate it with Gen AI or whatnot.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to your point, like every channel that hasn't been exploited will just kind of go through that natural progression the way that like SEO, right, went through the same thing, still going through the same thing. What is Google doing? They're always trying to stay ahead of the operators that aren't doing the authentic work, right? And then how do you separate signal from the rest? But I think platforms like this, Caleb, are great. Where it's like, to your point, if there's platforms where it's like, founders can just talk about why they're choosing the problem space they're in, why it's important. It's a great first step.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much. Try earmark.com. Really simple to download and get started. Thank you so much for the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Appreciate it.